1914. Say the British Empire controlled a quarter of the entire world. India, Canada, Australia, Egypt, South Africa. Massive territories across every inhabited continent. 450 million people lived under British rule. That's 1 in every 4 humans on Earth. The British Navy was larger than the next 2 navies combined. The pound sterling was the global reserve currency. London was the financial capital of the world. They had a saying, "The sun never sets," on the British Empire, and it was literally true. Then, in just 30 years, it was gone. The most powerful empire in human history collapsed so completely that by 1945, Britain was borrowing money from the United States just to survive what happened. They made one fatal mistake. A mistake so obvious in hindsight that historians call it inevitable. And in 2024, America is making the exact same mistake. The same pattern. The same warning signs. The same path to decline. Today, I'm going to show you exactly what that mistake was, why it destroyed Britain, and why the United States is walking down the same road. Because if we don't learn from history, we're doomed to repeat it. Let's start by understanding just how dominant Britain was. In 1914, at the empire's absolute peak, Britain controlled 13.7 million square miles of territory. That's almost a quarter of Earth's total land area. The British Navy had 29 battleships. Germany, their closest rival, had 17. Britain's fleet was designed to be larger than the next 2 largest navies combined. This wasn't just military strategy. It was a statement of absolute dominance. British factories produced more steel than Germany and the United States combined. British coal mines supplied half of Europe's energy. British banks financed projects on every continent. The pound sterling wasn't just a currency. It was the currency. If you wanted to do international trade anywhere in the world, you used pounds. Gold reserves backed it. The entire global financial system ran through London. Think about what this meant. A farmer in Argentina selling wheat to France would price it in British pounds. An oil company in Persia would pay its workers in currency tied to British pounds. A merchant in Shanghai would keep his savings in a London bank. Britain didn't just rule territory, it ruled the entire system. And Britannia truly did rule the waves. British merchant ships carried 40% of global trade. British insurance companies insured that trade. British ports serviced those ships. British companies managed the cargo. When you bought tea from India, it was grown on British-owned plantations, picked by workers, under British law, shipped on British vessels, insured by British companies, and paid for in British currency. The empire wasn't just political control, it was an integrated economic system that Britain set at the center of extracting wealth from every transaction. But here's what most people don't understand about empires. They're expensive, incredibly expensive. To maintain control over 450 million people across the globe, Britain needed military garrisons in dozens of countries. The Indian Army alone had 240,000 soldiers. Egypt required 50,000 troops. There were permanent British forces in Canada, Australia, South Africa, Singapore, Hong Kong, and dozens of other territories. A massive navy patrolling every ocean. Battleships require crews of 1,000 plus men each. They need constant maintenance, fuel, supplies, and ports to dock in. Colonial administrators governing every territory. Thousands of British officials running local governments, courts, police forces, and bureaucracies. Infrastructure connecting the empire. Railroads, telegraph lines, ports, roads, all built and maintained at British expense. This cost a fortune. In 1914, Britain was spending roughly 3% of GDP on military and colonial administration during peacetime. That doesn't sound like much, but remember, this was during peace. Britain hadn't fought a major war since the Boer War ended in 1902. The system worked because the empire was generating wealth faster than it cost to maintain. India alone contributed massive tax revenues. Trade flowing through British ports generated customs duties. Investments in colonial enterprises returned profits to British investors. As long as the income exceeded the costs, the empire was sustainable. But that balance was fragile, much more fragile than anyone realized. And then, in August 1914, everything changed. World War I began, and Britain made the fatal mistake that would ultimately destroy the empire. The mistake wasn't starting World War I. Britain didn't start it. Austria-Hungary and Germany did. The mistake wasn't fighting in World War I. Britain had treaty obligations to defend Belgium, and German aggression threatened British interests. The fatal mistake was this: Britain tried to maintain a global empire while simultaneously fighting the most expensive war in human history. Let me explain what this meant in practice. When war broke out in 1914, Britain faced enemies on multiple fronts. Germany, in Europe, obviously, but also the Ottoman Empire in the Middle East, German colonies in Africa, threats to India, naval battles across the Atlantic and Pacific. Britain couldn't just focus on defeating Germany. It had to simultaneously defend the entire empire. Indian troops were deployed to fight in Europe, in the Middle East, and Africa. Australian and Canadian forces fought in France and Gallipoli. South African troops invaded German and Southwest Africa. British forces from Hong Kong captured German territories in China. The empire became a strategic liability disguised as an asset. Here's the brutal math. World War I cost Britain approximately £7.4 billion. That's roughly 400% of Britain's pre-war GDP. 4 times the entire economic output of the country. Where did this money come from? Some from taxes. Income taxes rose dramatically. New taxes were created. Some from selling assets. Britain liquidated foreign investments, selling off American securities and other holdings. But mostly debt. Britain borrowed massive amounts, primarily from the United States. By 1918, Britain owed the United States over £1 billion. Roughly $4.7 billion at the time. This was an astronomical sum. Britain had gone from the world's largest creditor nation to a debtor nation in just 4 years. But here's where it gets worse. After the war ended in 1918, Britain faced a choice that would determine the empire's fate. Option 1, scale back the empire. Give up territories that were expensive to maintain. Reduce military spending. Focus on rebuilding the domestic economy. Option 2, try to maintain everything. Keep all the territories. Maintain the global military presence. Preserve the illusion of continued dominance. Britain chose option 2. Why? Pride, tradition, political pressure, the psychological inability to accept that the empire's peak was behind it. British politicians spoke of imperial duty. Newspapers wrote about Britain's civilizing mission. The public had been raised to believe in British success. Admitting decline was politically impossible, so Britain tried to maintain an empire it could no longer afford. Throughout the 1920s and 1930s, Britain continued spending massive amounts on military forces stationed worldwide. The Royal Navy remained enormous, despite Britain's inability to afford it. Colonial administrations continued operating at full scale. Meanwhile, competitors were rising. The United States emerged from World War I as an economic powerhouse. American industry had supplied the Allies during the war and grew massively. The US was now the world's largest creditor nation, the position Britain once held. Japan was industrializing rapidly and challenging British dominance in Asia. Germany, despite losing the war, still had the industrial capacity and skilled workforce to rebuild. Britain was trying to maintain first-place status in a race where it no longer had first-place resources. And then came World War II. If World War I damaged the British Empire, World War II destroyed it completely. The war cost Britain another £7 billion. But the country went even deeper into debt to the United States. Entire cities were bombed into rubble. The economy was devastated. By 1945, Britain was functionally bankrupt. The United States, now unquestionably the dominant power, made its position clear. If Britain wanted American financial aid to rebuild, it needed to start dismantling the empire. And so, it began. India gained independence in 1947. Palestine was abandoned in 1948. Colonies, Africa and Asia demanded and received independence throughout the 1950s and 1960s. The Suez Crisis of 1956 was the final humiliation. Britain and France tried to maintain control over the Suez Canal. The United States forced them to back down, demonstrating clearly who was now in charge. By 1970, the British Empire was gone. The fatal mistake: trying to maintain an empire after losing the economic capacity to afford it. Overextension. Imperial overreach. Refusing to accept decline. Now, let's talk about America. The United States military has 750 military bases in 80 countries. Let me repeat that. 750 bases across 80 countries. Permanent installations with American troops, equipment, and infrastructure. Britain at its peak had approximately 100 major military installations outside the home islands. America has more than 7 times that number. American troops are currently deployed in Europe, Asia, the Middle East, Africa, Australia, and dozens of smaller locations worldwide. The US Navy operates 11 aircraft carrier strike groups, more than every other country combined. Each carrier strike group includes the carrier itself, multiple destroyers, cruisers, submarines, and support ships. Thousands of personnel, operating 24/7, 365 days a year. The cost of this global military presence. The 2024 US defense budget is $877 billion. That's more than the next 10 countries combined spend on their militaries. But it doesn't stop there. The United States is currently involved militarily in multiple regions simultaneously, supporting Ukraine against Russia with tens of billions in military aid, supporting Israel in the Middle East conflict, maintaining troop presence in Syria, operating bases throughout the Persian Gulf, patrolling the South China Sea to counter China, maintaining defense commitments to Japan, South Korea, Taiwan, and other Asian allies, defending NATO allies in Europe, operating counterterrorism missions in Africa. Does this sound familiar? It's the exact same pattern as Britain in 1914 to 1945. A global military presence spread across every continent. Commitments to allies everywhere. The responsibility of being world police. And here's the critical parallel. America, like Britain, is doing this while facing massive economic strain. The US national debt is currently $36 trillion. That's 120% of GDP. Interest payments on that debt alone costs over $1 trillion per year now. That's more than the defense budget in some years. More than Medicare, more than the entire education budget. The United States is borrowing money to pay interest on money it already borrowed. Sound familiar? It's exactly what Britain did after World War I. But it gets worse. America's manufacturing base, once the strongest in the world, has been hollowed out. Steel production, electronics, manufacturing, automobile production. Much of it is moved to China and other countries. In 1945, the United States produced 50% of global manufactured goods. Today, less than 18%. China now produces more steel than the rest of the world combined. China graduates more engineers than America. China manufactures most of the world's electronics, rare earth minerals, and advanced technology components. Britain faced the same thing. After World War I, US and German manufacturing had overtaken British production. Britain was no longer the industrial leader, but kept spending as if it were. And here's perhaps the most critical parallel. Currency dominance is being challenged. The British pound was the global reserve currency until World War II. Then the dollar replaced it. Now, countries are actively working to reduce dependence on the dollar. China and Russia conduct trade in yuan and rubles. Países and nations Brazil, Russia, India, China, South Africa are developing alternative payment systems. Saudi Arabia, America's longtime ally, is now accepting yuan for oil sales. The dollar still dominates, just as the pound still dominated in the 1920s and 1930s. But the trend is clear. The world is slowly diversifying away from dollar dependence. The United States is in the exact same position Britain was in the 1920s. Massive military overextension globally, rising debt levels that are becoming unsustainable, a challenger power rising economically China, like the US was to Britain, manufacturing decline relative to competitors, currency dominance being slowly eroded. The pattern is identical, and here's what makes it even more concerning. America, like Britain, seems psychologically unable to accept that scaling back might be necessary. American politicians speak of American leadership. The media discusses America's responsibility to maintain global order. The public has been raised to believe in American exceptionalism, admitting that America might need to reduce its global military presence, might need to let other countries handle their own regional issues, might need to focus on domestic infrastructure instead of foreign wars. This is politically very difficult. Just like it was for Britain. When Britain finally did begin dismantling the empire after World War II, it wasn't by choice. It was because they literally couldn't afford it anymore. The decision was made for them by economic reality. Is America heading toward the same forced choice? The parallels are striking. The pattern is clear. Britain's fatal mistake was maintaining an empire it could no longer afford, refusing to scale back until economic reality forced the issue. America appears to be making the same mistake. 750 military bases, commitments on every continent. Rising debt, manufacturing decline, currency challenges. A rising competitor. History doesn't repeat, but it often rhymes. And this is sounding very familiar. So what happens now? If America is following Britain's path, what comes next? There are three possibilities. America gradually reduces its global military presence, not through catastrophic collapse, but through slow, calculated withdrawal. Fewer foreign bases, reduced commitments to allies, more focus on domestic issues. America would remain powerful and wealthy, just not globally dominant. Like Britain today, still important, still influential, just not the superpower. This is probably the best-case scenario, a managed transition to a multipolar world where America shares power with China, Europe, and other regional powers. A major economic crisis or military conflict forces America's hand. Maybe a debt crisis, maybe a war with China that America can't afford to sustain, maybe a domestic crisis that requires pulling back resources. Britain experienced this with World War II. The war devastated the economy so completely that maintaining the empire became impossible. Could America face something similar? A crisis so severe that global commitments become unsustainable overnight. This would be more painful, more chaotic. But history suggests major transitions often happen this way, through crisis rather than planned adjustment. America learns from Britain's mistake, recognizes the pattern, acknowledges the limits, makes strategic choices to reduce overextension while maintaining core strength, invests in domestic infrastructure, education, and manufacturing instead of endless foreign commitments. This is the hardest path because it requires admitting something many Americans don't want to hear, that America can't do everything, everywhere, forever. But it's possible. Britain could have managed its decline better if it had started earlier, before World War II forced the issue. America still has time to make different choices. The question is, will we? Britain ignored every warning sign. Their leaders spoke of imperial duty while the treasury emptied. They maintained military bases. They couldn't afford. They refused to acknowledge that the world had changed, and in just one generation, an empire that ruled the world for a century was gone. America is seeing the same warning signs right now. The question isn't whether history is repeating. The question is whether we'll learn from it. Britain didn't have the benefit of seeing another empire make this mistake first. We do. We can look at Britain's decline and see exactly where our current path leads. The only question is, will we change course, or will we repeat the same fatal mistake? If you want to understand how empires rise and fall, how economic forces shape global power, and what America's future might hold, subscribe to this channel, because this story isn't over. We're living through the most important geopolitical transition since World War II. And whether we learn from history or repeat it will determine what the next century looks like. The choice is ours.